Madam President, the United States is deeply concerned about Syrian refugees in Lebanon and Lebanese civilians who have been displaced by the current conflict there. They are faced with the impossible choice of fleeing within Lebanon or crossing Lebanon's borders to insecurity in Syria. We are working to help the most vulnerable refugees, internally displaced persons, and host communities as they respond to the crisis. On September 26, the United States announced nearly $534 million in additional humanitarian assistance for the Syrian people, including assistance provided through international organization partners. The United States continues to uphold our commitment to the Syrian people, as well as displaced Lebanese, and we urge other donors to join us in stepping up to fill the significant funding gaps so partners can continue to meet the needs of the most vulnerable. The regime and all parties in Syria must allow immediate and unhindered humanitarian access across all areas of Syria for as long as needs persist. We take note of recent improvements in UNHCR's access to returnees, both at the border and in their areas of return. We also note the Syrian regime's decision to temporarily suspend exploitative fees for Syrians returning to their country. These steps are positive, but long overdue, and much more work remains to be done. As such, we continue to support UNHCR's efforts to improve the protection environment in Syria. In this context, we are very concerned about continued reports of abuses against returnees, including the regime arbitrarily detaining returnees. Returns will never be truly voluntary, safe, dignified, or sustainable until the regime changes its ways and upholds human rights and fundamental freedoms for all. We also note with alarm the recent escalation in regime and Russian attacks on northwest Syria that have caused scores of deaths and injuries. Russian or regime strikes also damaged critical civilian infrastructure, including a key power plant, leaving dozens of communities without drinking water. Under the pretense of fighting terrorism in northwest Syria, the regime in Russia are carrying out brutal attacks on civilians that have left Syrian families homeless, deprived of food and water, and brutally maimed or killed. Such horrors repeat themselves in Assad Syria week in and week out. Turning to the political process, we continue to support Special Envoy Pedersen's efforts and call on the regime to commit to a meeting of the Constitutional Committee regardless of the location. We expect to hear the same old empty rhetoric from the regime here today. It will rehash the same tired arguments, blaming sanctions and the West for all their problems. But in fact, it is the regime's deep fear of serious dialogue that has ground the Constitutional Committee to a halt. And it is the regime's own corruption, kleptocracy, and wanton violence that has driven Syrians into poverty. The regime could alleviate the suffering of its people simply by coming to the negotiating table in good faith, an easy step it refuses to take. While the Assad regime refuses to engage in a political process, ordinary Syrians continue to suffer. The only way to end their suffering remains a political solution in line with UN Security Council Resolution 2254. To conclude, I reiterate the call for the immediate release of Austin Tice. 12 terrible years have passed since he was abducted in Syria and held by the Syrian regime. The United States has repeatedly pressed Damascus to work with us so that we can at last bring Austin home. Thank you, Madam President.